Welcome to Soul Celebration.
Disclaimer. The following video does not glorify the use of drugs. Instead, it attempts to be non-biased while delivering vital life-saving information disguised as entertainment.
Today we are celebrating World's LSD Day, occurring on April 19th.
And so, if I remember correctly, this holiday is because this is the day that Albert Hofmann discovered LSD.
Yes,
correct?
correct.
Yes. So that already is kind of an interesting story in and by itself, because Mr. Hofmann, so he was experimenting in his laboratory, trying to find. Don't quote me on this. I don't know what he was trying to find.
Some medical compound.
He was researching compounds, and then one day he was experimenting with this new compound, lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD.
Lysergic acid diethylamide is a synthetic chemical psychedelic drug. LSD is often referred to as acid or Lucy, with effects lasting on average 8 to 12 hours.
And he accidentally absorbed a little bit through the tips of his fingers, and this just goes to show how potent of a substance it is, because if you use it, you don't count it in grams, it's in micrograms. It's like 1/1000th of a gram. And when he hopped on his bike, he didn't feel so well, so he hopped on his bike and started driving home, and the whole world all of a sudden started moving, and he started experiencing bright colors and everything. So he had the first ever trip. He thought like, oh my god, I fucked myself up. What is happening? Maybe I'm like gonna stay like this forever, you know. And so he went to bed like completely shaken from the because it was the first time he ever tripped. He didn't know that was gonna happen, and it's kind of intense if you don't know that it's supposed to happen. Like, anyways, he goes to bed. Next day he wakes up. He feels fresh as fuck. He just feels perfect, like really good, like almost reborn, like super healthy, weirdly healthy. So he goes to his laboratory, and he's very excited about this new compound because he just discovered something that had a strong effect on him. And, well, he just had the first ever LSD trip, so he was excited. And then he did something really stupid. He took an entire droplet of it, orally, without knowing the quantity. The rumors are that he got dosed with 10,000 micrograms.
Wow.
Like, for the record, a normal trip is about 100 micrograms. And so that day thought he killed himself. Like, there's reports of him laying in his bed and witnessing himself from above. That he completely went out of his own body and was looking down upon himself, being convinced that he had actually killed himself, that he died. That was the reason why he was seeing himself laying there on the bed. But then the next morning, he woke up and he felt completely reborn. He had a complete ego death, so he just felt like a new person. Sun was shining, he felt amazing, like super amazing, just brilliant. Also shocked, but rebirthed. Yeah, that's the rest is history. That's how LSD started.
That's the beginning of LSD.
Yeah, that's the beginning.
Oh, thanks to Albert Hofmann.
But I think it was the 30s actually. So the way it happened in the 50s or 60s, as far as I remember, is there was two brothers and they found LSD. They created a huge batch of LSD called Orange Sunshine. That's the infamous. I think this was in the late 50s, and they made a mission out of it because they wanted to make the world a better place, and they found that taking LSD had expanded their minds and made them more in touch with their body and with nature, and made them more aware of other people's feelings and more empathic through what's going on in the world, and made them look at the topics they had with a more critical, refreshed eye instead of buying into the propaganda and all these things. So they created this huge amount, like, could be a few kilos of LSD, an extreme amount of LSD, and they just started dispersing it like
giving it out
like crazy. Yeah, they just really pushed it into the United States, and that's where the whole Woodstock and all these things came from. That's why there all of a sudden so many people were hippies, and we have the 60s where the whole hippie period takes over, and it's all peace and love. And how it all started for me with LSD, you know, I was 14 years old. Most of my friends around that age started like, I don't know, hanging out in groups, doing the typical puberty little parties, smuggling some alcohol from the night store. But then I got exposed to weed instead of alcohol first. Because I smoked weed and I was kind of scared of it because I thought this is illegal, you know, there must be a reason why it's illegal. It felt really chill. I was active, like creatively inspired. So all of a sudden I realized like, why the fuck is alcohol legal and weed isn't legal? Like like experiencing now what weed feels like. And then I saw my friends who were starting to drink, who, I don't know, had all these fucking fights with each other, and they were like, I don't know, not really respectful towards themselves and their surroundings. And then this one got their fucking kneecap broken in half by jumping from a rooftop on a drunk party. And then meanwhile, me and my stoner friends, we were just sitting in the forest building a camp, like just super fucking relaxed, super peaceful. So yeah, anyways, so this is why I got interested in the topic of drugs in general, and then this is how all of this ties into LSD. Like, I was ideologically against alcohol at the time, because I thought, why the fuck is this toxic shit legal? And so what other drugs are there? Like, if this can change the way I experience reality so much, and when I could see what weed could do to my consciousness, I was interested in drugs, and I started researching heavily. Most other substances frequently get used to escape one's reality. Not having this burden of having all this internal pain because of, I don't know, dissatisfaction, cluelessness of where one wants to go in life, while LSD brings you deeper in reality. It's almost like instead of being removed from everything that you're trying to run from, you are confronted with it extra hard, and not just the things that you are trying to run from in the moment or that you're trying to forget, but even more, what's more important is the things that you already escaped far enough that they're not catching up with you. Like all the things you have mental defenses for and all these things. So the first LSD trips were very intense emotionally, like definitely not party experiences, but it just, because it brought me back in the past, it was like, yeah, all of these traumas, all of these experiences that I've had that I've never processed, all of these things that I'm like actively pushing away from my memory because I don't want to remember it because it was such an unpleasant experience, or I'm ashamed of it, or all these things. All these automatic blockages are just removed, and you just process everything. With alcohol, you have a really bad hangover. With LSD, you feel kind of reborn the day afterwards. You feel...
What kind of dynamics or past traumas did you start working on initially when you encountered LSD?
Good question. I come from a big family, and all of my siblings and my parents as well have a really strong personality. So that means it can get very hectic at home, like a lot of people screaming at the table, and typical children as well. You know how children are always like... What's very common, and a lot of people have this trauma, that they were told as a child all the time, be still, be silent. Like especially when you're, let's say, 2 years old, you're at the restaurant with your parents and you start screaming like crazy. Your parents will get mad at you. And this is not like a major trauma of like, oh no, I don't know, someone killed someone that was very dear to me. But it's a micro trauma. And the problem is, as a young child, when you're 2 years old and you're screaming and your parent is mad at you, you don't have this same logical reasoning as an adult yet. So you interpret it as me being loud makes my parents mad at me. If my parents are mad at me, they will reject me, they will leave me alone, and I will die. Because I'm a baby, I can't live for myself yet. So to the child, it manifests that inside of itself as an adult, as I am not allowed to be loud. And if a child gets told enough by their parents that they should be quiet, and especially at a really young age, they disown the part of them that is loud. That also meant that I had a time during puberty where I was, first of all, quite insecure. But what didn't help, and what kind of also in a way had a bit of a big reason with the insecurity, is the fact that I talked really quiet, because I didn't want to, I didn't want to have people be mad at me for talking too loud. And parents always also saying like, don't talk so much. So I didn't dare to really share what I was saying, which in turn meant that no one was listening to me, because I was just being kind of like... No one listened to me because of it, which meant that I even more felt like I didn't have anything interesting to say, because otherwise people would be listening to me.
Which probably also because you had a big family.
Yeah.
So there was many people to talk all the time.
Yeah, exactly. There was always many people to talk to, and they all had their own opinions. But in the family, we didn't listen to each other. So they all created this like, people don't want to listen to me feeling. And then on LSD, I was in the forest and I had a random impulse. I just felt it, this feeling of, I want to scream. I want to like, and I tried to, nothing came out. I couldn't be loud. I screamed a little bit, but it felt like there was never this like deep oomph, like this really this power coming out. Like there was a constant little blockage in my throat. Like I really felt this, and it took me time to in that moment I realized, holy fuck, why can I not scream? Like why do I feel this blockage? Where does it come from? And I closed my eyes. I really try to feel internally and go through my mind and memory of like, where does this come from? One way they would call it in spirituality is the chakras. If you like look at chakra system, it was like my throat chakra was blocked. Energy center you can call it too. I eventually found the origin and it was like, wow moment. And then I tried again screaming and it was kind of working, but not really. And then again screaming, and a little bit later, all of a sudden I just screamed out of the top of my lungs. And from that day on, also the way I talked changed. I felt like I wasn't afraid anymore to just speak up. So LSD disables your default network, which means that it stops all the conditioned and patterned thinking. So all the little automatic responses from your brain, all the automatisms, disappear. So that means if you created this internal filter of I shall not be loud, and as soon as you feel like, oh, I'm starting to be more, like take up more space in the room, automatic little blockage, automatic little cut off. After the screaming experience, it's kind of funny to call it like that, I was talking to my friends with a very like a natural, like a voice that really came out of me, not like this little pulled in character, but really openly taking up space and daring to be loud and all these things. And all of a sudden they were listening to me because they could feel that it wasn't coming from this insecure place, that actually I believed I had something to say and I could speak my truth freely. So that's one of the first traumas that I...
How would you explain the ego and your experiences with working with the ego?
I would explain the ego as basically this inner narrator voice that we have in our head sometimes. If we look at ourselves from a spiritual perspective, we carry an element of formlessness within us, which means that we are ultimately connected to the universe. Like we're not even connected to the universe, we are ultimately the universe. The universe itself, if you think about vast space, if you think about just space-time, it's silent, it's formless. There's no thoughts, there's no things, there's the space between stars and planets and all these things, and it's complete emptiness. Inside of us, we have something similar. Some people call it the soul, some people call it consciousness. It is the awareness behind all the thoughts, behind everything. It's an inner stillness. It's also a way you can find this place inside of yourself. One way is to become extremely present to the moment, to really completely exist in the now. One of the reasons why we are not connected to our souls, to the formless part of our being, is because our ego sits in the way and we identify with the ego, we identify with the mind. And one of the markers of that is that we identify with time. So our ego is constantly projecting itself onto the future and onto the past, and tries to build up a self-identity out of that. It thinks, I am defined by my past actions, or I am defined by what I'm going to do in the future. It creates a thing. But in reality, the truth is that there is only here this exact moment right now. And for those of you watching, wherever you are watching it, this has been supposedly recorded in a different time, but there is for you also only right now. The exact experience that you have right now, your sensory body. If you see consciousness as the observer of the universe, some people like to believe that the universe or that life was created to observe the universe itself, so that the universe kind of grew life to be able to witness everything that's going on, to experience everything. You can see that only everything that you witness with your senses right now is actually real, because all the things that you think about that are happening somewhere else, it's still just a mental extrapolation of what might be happening. It's still an image created in your mind to predict and to hold on to the reality that everything outside is real, and that everything else is real, and that time is real, and that we move through time. So the ego is this part that, first of all, needs time to survive, and the ego creates a lot of the suffering that we experience because we constantly worry and regret and constantly hold ourselves in these mental prisons of I have to do this thing, I have to do this thing, I have to do this thing.
Because we compare ourselves to time.
Yes. People who are really feeling bad all the time, it's very often because their mind is just the whole time telling them hella shit. There's the whole time, oh, you did this thing wrong, you did this thing wrong, and you're a piece of shit because of this, and why are you not better like this, and why are you not better like this? Why are you not living like this? Why are you doing this? Why are you not doing that? Their mind is constantly telling them an inner narrative of usually self-loathing, of whatever story it is. But the point is, that story, it's still created by the mind. It's still the brain holding on to this idea of what an individual is. And through psychedelics, in part, that doesn't always happen. Many spiritual people try to strive for this, and many people have experienced it without even realizing it because they don't name it as such. But you can experience something called ego death, when you really let go of all the mental constructs.
Yeah, for example, it could be also social dynamics and who you are with your friends, in your family, your name, your prestige, your everything.
That's a good example, yeah. And people feel a lot of stress to uphold all these things, the prestige, the name, the constantly feeling like you have to present yourself for some external judgment that is often based in illusion. Like when you're on a high dose of LSD or mushrooms, when you look at something, it's like you see it for the first time. That's why people are so captivated by the world. They're just like, wow, a wall, because they've never seen a wall. It looks, or like just random trees, and your brain doesn't automatically label it tree. So you're really just looking at the structure of things without putting a mental judgment or mental label or a way to like reduce the amount of information that you have to uptake. You're not really looking at the world anymore. Just like my spiritual journey is interconnected with psychedelics quite a lot. That also means that when I'm, for example, that it makes me very open to explore ideas that are not directly in alignment with the ideas that I already had before. So it allows me basically to not get too attached to an idea, because that's also a part of ego dissolution, is that if you don't hold yourself to an identity, you can't say, I am Buddhist, or I am Taoist, or I am Christian, or I am all these things, because from a higher, like from this spiritual perspective, you are not an identity. So that leaves me open to explore all the different avenues. So that also means that I don't have a fixated idea of this is what I believe. I can't say I believe that this is the highest state, or I believe that this is the highest state. I believe that all of these could be the highest state. It's just kind of depending on the thing you choose to look at, on the perspective from which you want to observe the ideals have. In the more traditional, or current spiritual sense, people want to let go of the ego, they want to completely disillusion it. But for me personally, I feel like currently I'd rather focus on healthy integration of the ego. So I needed the spiritual background of ego dissolution and really learning what the ego is and trying to have an ego death, trying to not be guided by my ego, trying to completely let go of this. I think this was important to get rid of all the suffering that the ego caused, all the mental stories I told myself, all the ways, I told myself I wasn't good enough, or I didn't compare to that, or I didn't have this, or didn't have that. Or
how would you describe that you have been reintegrating a more healthy ego, if you can give advice to some people?
Yeah, so I think, the ego also has its function. The ego is also responsible for drive, because cities need to be built, things need to get done, and I think there's a very natural, logical need for people to get things done, and I think people can be very satisfied living as a monk in a monastery, but I believe that for a young human, life can be much more enriching if we integrate the ego in a healthy way and not in a deserving way. A good way to reintegrate the ego, for example, would be to research moral structures and moral philosophy and all these things, and also build up a moral framework for yourself, meaning that you do have kind of and that is your ego. It's kind of a mental construct of what is right and what is wrong. But instead of, the problem is that most people, they blindly assume their moral structure based on what they've learned throughout their life. So they get their typical, school ideas, or the ideas that they get from their parents and grandparents, and they just adapt all of this into their moral structure without ever questioning what does actually make sense to me as an individual, what kind of moral ideas are out there. So this is one thing. The other thing is also what is like the deeper underlying desire that the ego is trying to satisfy with a bunch of extra reasonings in between. So for example, let's say you want a fancy car. Why do you want a fancy car? because you want to have a certain status in people's eyes. That's coming from the ego's desire to be seen and to be respected. So how can I be seen? Instead of thinking, okay, I need the car, I take all the steps back and then figure out, okay, the desire is to be seen and to be respected. Do I need a car for that? Probably not. What I need more is to do something that has an impact on people's life so that they will see and respect me for the actions I took. And then that's where my ego comes in to help me push for that, to give me the drive and to be like, yes, I do want to be seen a certain way. I do want to have a positive image related to me. So how can I do this in a healthy way instead of just blindly adapting the values taught by capitalism?
Okay, so that's how the whole healthy reintegration of the ego comes in.
Yeah.
That you kind of made this moral compass in which you want to navigate in.
A moral compass, yes. And also, maybe I wasn't clear on this enough, moral compass, but also get a sense of direction and accomplishment, like what you want to accomplish in life, like going really meta of, like on a deeper level, what does my soul crave? And how can my ego, how can I create a mental structure and framework that gets me to this place? Yeah. The thing with LSD is that it doesn't give you, or psychedelics, is that it doesn't really give you what you want necessarily, it gives you what you need. So you can think, I'm going to this event and I want to take some LSD because I want to have fun. But it doesn't mean you're actually going to have fun there. It could also be that all of a sudden this thing from your past that you haven't processed comes up and you have to go through this whole thing. Or that, I don't know, you feel some emotion very strongly that needs to be felt and needs to be expressed. And one example of that is I took LSD with my friends to have a fun time, but then I ended up laying by myself in the grass, removed from everyone because I wanted to be alone. And I felt this deep, deep sadness inside of me. And I was 18 years old and I hadn't cried in the last so many years. And so because the psychedelics also let you go of the conditioning, instead of, when I felt the emotion of sadness inside of me, instead of like usual, repressing the emotion immediately or avoiding it or switching it to anger, I just allowed the emotion to come out, to come up and to really be experienced and expressed. So I cried my eyes out. It felt like the biggest relief. It was almost like the last 5 years of bottling everything up all of a sudden could just flow freely. And after that I felt so refreshed.
Okay. It's also interesting that you said that it brought up old experiences, something you have suppressed, and then you gave it attention, or you allowed yourself to feel into it.
Yeah, like allowing the emotion to take up space, basically. Allowing it to really take hold in yourself.
Sounds like LSD also helps you with more confronting yourself. Okay, I don't need to be a tough masculine man. I can also be soft and still, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, because all the conditioning is gone, so you don't need to be the tough man. You realize this. And a lot of my early trips also were specifically about finding softness inside of myself, because I indeed did feel very lonely sometimes. I mean, that's a lot of young teenagers feel like that, like, oh, the world is, in some way, the world is against me and no one understands me and no one can relate to my feelings and all these things.
What was the highest amount of LSD you ever tried?
So the highest amount of LSD I've ever tried, so I was looking at the Wikipedia page of LSD and it said 800 micrograms. On the Wikipedia it said ego death, one word. So normal dosage is about 100 micrograms, and I wanted to know what it felt like to lose my ego, and I wasn't scared at the moment. So I tried 800 micrograms in the forest with a friend of mine. He took 250 micrograms, I took 800 micrograms. So that was a good way to show how varied the experiences can be, how it can be a completely different thing at different doses, where it's almost not like the same drugs. While with alcohol, it feels like you progressively just have more of your senses that are being closed off. With LSD, the effects at 250 micrograms and 800 micrograms are completely incomparable. It's almost like they're a different experience. So my friend, he found a little stick, and then he had a whole narrative in his head with the stick, how that was his friend, and how the stick came from a special place, and blah, blah, blah. He had this whole fun, lightful, playful mood. He was jumping around through the forest, looking at the insects, everything. For me, it felt like a bomb had exploded in the distance, but the shockwave hadn't reached me yet. Like, I felt already the presence of it going through my body, but it didn't hit me yet. And I felt a little bit of like unease almost, so we started walking around. And then it started hitting harder and harder. And in the beginning, it started with everything, the whole world just moving organically, bright geometric shapes taking up hold everywhere. Things like a tree trunk would start looking like something completely different, and it became more and more and more intense until I ended up laying on the floor and all the intensity just dissipated. Like 30 minutes later, all of a sudden the visuals were still there. It wasn't like super much. The visuals were still there, but I stopped existing. My sense of self, me, everything, if I say me, if my mind uses that word, everything that I am, everything that I think I am, I stopped being. So my complete subjective sense of self disappeared. That means that it also came in waves, but it felt like, first of all, I was merging with the ground below me. So my body and the ground wasn't separated, and my energy, like my consciousness, was expanding through the ground, outside, like everywhere around me, like a bubble, just being absorbed by the rest of the universe. And slowly the line between me and everything that was around me completely faded away, where I wasn't laying on the floor anymore, I was the floor. It was like there was no separation between my body and the leaves, just like how, I don't know, a branch lays there, the dirt is there, you have some leaves, the fallen leaves, little bushes, grass, all these different elements.
So you became the grass you were laying on?
I didn't become the grass itself, but I became the ground as a whole, because the grass, it's almost like the grass that has been thought of as grass by itself, now is just part of the ground, like we perceive it. We don't perceive these different elements, we are more just, this is the ground we walk on. And so I became that ground, but I didn't just become the ground, I became the whole forest and the whole universe around me. So at some point there was a little spider that started crawling over me, and there was no me to stop the spider in its path anymore. So it could just wander over me as if it was wandering over the rest of the floor.
Oh.
And yeah, I was laying there for hours. Just.
Was it joyful?
It was extremely blissful and extremely peaceful, but it wasn't. I was just pure experience and not really. There wasn't a me in that moment to judge the experience as positive or anything for that matter. I was just the experience. So looking back at it from the perspective of the ego, I would now say that it's extremely blissful because it's the most profound peace there is. Merging with the whole universe is the most profoundly deep feeling of peace someone can ever experience, because everything that could be bothering you just disappears. And
how long were you able to hold on to both the bliss, but maybe more the sense of ego separation?
Yeah, so I was laying there in the forest for many hours in this complete bliss state, or in complete peace. And my friend, who, you know, he was having a strip in a normal rate, like that meant he came up, was very excited, but now he started to become a little bit tired and hungry. So I don't know how long. Complete time perception is dissolved, so you don't know how long you're there. So he came up to me and he was like, I'm starting to be hungry. And that's what I meant with I was experiencing through my body, but not aware of my body. When he told me he felt hungry, I paid attention to it and I was like, oh yeah, there is hunger. But there was no me to stand up, or to be motivated to get food, or to have any desires, or for that feeling to be anything else but just a feeling of hunger.
You were just laying in the grass being...
Yeah, I was just laying on the forest floor without any me to be motivated to action. So my friend continued his stuff a bit, and then he got really, really angry. So I was like, come, we have to go. And the whole way back to our place was very difficult for me to keep moving forward, because I really had to pull the will into me to do anything. And then, because it was more for him than for myself, I went there, and then as soon as I arrived home, I sat down somewhere and I stopped existing again. I was just pure experience.
So also when you came home, you were still kind of in this
Yeah, I was still in this. I was in it
non-separateness.
for hours and hours.
Well, how would you say that you continued living with the feeling of having experienced separateness, non-separateness, with the whole?
Yeah, so that's also, it's good that you introduced that question like this, because it kind of ties into this thing where ego death is like seen as this highest ideal, but I don't believe it's a state we can live in continuously, and also probably shouldn't live in continuously. Like, there's a reason why we developed the ability to think the way we do. So indeed, I couldn't stay in this feeling of ego death forever. Once you have had the experience of ego death, you recognize the place inside of you that is the formless dimension, that is this quiet observer of your thoughts, that it's not your mind identifying you, but just the stillness within that witnesses all, including your thoughts, including your desires, including the physical pain, without identifying with the pain and without making it, and the thoughts, and without making it into this sense of self. So I would say that this experience afterwards gave me a better ability to get back to that place inside of myself, to understand how to tap into the formless dimension, and to also separate, am I now thinking that I am conscious, or am I actually conscious? Because that's a funny little mind trap that you probably know a lot about as well. Yeah. So I would like to hear your perspective on this. How do you know the difference between thinking you are conscious or actually being conscious?
It's the sense of being, and not thinking about, it feels so good to be present now. Deep breath. You know, it's just flowing naturally.
So not this, because now what you were kind of saying is this internal narration where you're like, indeed, like, deep breath, I take a breath now.
Yeah.
And what was the other one you said?
Or more a sense of being, without having to put any kinds of recipe on being.
Yeah.
It's a feeling. It's
a state of being.
Being is a state of being.
Yeah, being is a state of being. So the deeper and formless dimension in Taoism is called the Tao. That's the Tao. It's this formless stream of energy that drives life down a certain path, but also it's like almost like a current that is presence or being, or that nurtures everything without being depleted. That is the complete formless dimension. But the first rule of the Tao is that the Tao that can be named is not the ultimate Tao. The Tao that can be told is not the ultimate Tao. So even if we use all these words like presence, being, consciousness, those are already not it, because this is a word. This is like a structure that we put on something to point at it. Yeah. While the thing itself is formless.
Yeah, exactly.
This doesn't have a form. So we can point at it with these words, but it is not these words, which also makes it very complex to
ego-free people.
True consciousness.
Yeah, true consciousness in people, or real ego-free people, don't even have the urge to express that they are spiritual or they are present.
Yeah, it's like this thing where if people try to dress a certain way to express the fact that they are conscious, that is already the ego telling them that they have to present themselves a certain way and look this way. And I guess what you are trying to get to is that the people who feel a need to explain to other people that they are spiritual, like people who feel a need to be like, oh, I am so spiritual because I do this and this and this is all just ego clinging on to the identity of spirituality.
Yeah. And another take on collective ego, I would also say it's the evolution also in generations, and it's interesting to see how the collective ego is also changing a lot.
Yeah, how it evolves over time.
I have a lot of trust and belief and hope that the collective ego will be a bit more considerate and a bit more wise regarding behavior and regarding morals and beliefs.
Yeah, and that's actually very good that you mentioned this, because this also shows that the ego is not all bad. It's not because that's the problem in a lot of spiritual communities or spiritual circles, is that the ego is demonized as this thing that causes all suffering. And I mean, okay, some people say it does, but the thing that like fucks everything up and only fucks things up. But indeed, I think the collective unconscious, the collective ego is currently changing to be more aware of the environment, to like organic food and milk replacement products and all these kind of movements, the vegan movement, the feminist movement, the queer community, all of these things are coming from a place where people are becoming more and more aware of the suffering they're causing and aware of the harm they're causing to the world.
That they are causing.
Exactly.
And also the interesting part of the awakening, because I feel like more and more people eventually becomes more awakened because they experience from this or something, like, you know, they become aware of the dynamics that have been holding them and have been steering them the whole lives. A lot of more conservative, maybe, I don't want to call them narrow-minded people, but people who see a lot of safety in just going one way. I feel like this part is really expanding, and a lot more people are really like searching diversity, and which is
indeed,
eye-opening for a lot of people. And while taking LSD, what is important in the setting?
Okay, so what is important in your setting if you take LSD is that it's ideally either an environment that you are very familiar with or that you are very comfortable with. And there should not be any unexpected challenges coming up. Like, for example, if you would be taking LSD for the first time at your friend's place and their mom comes home angry at them, that would be a very, very, very uncomfortable place to trip in. So for me personally, I feel really good in the forests. I spent a lot of time as a kid in the forest, so that means, and I think for most people, nature in general, the set is kind of, for example, the people you're with. If you shouldn't trip with someone you don't know very well, because we might not be aware of it, but there might be things in their personality that don't really align with ours, or basically you become hypersensitive while you're on psychedelics. So you feel all the energies way more, and that means that if an outside person comes in, a complete stranger, or someone you think you know but you don't know them very well, you might start creating a bunch of paranoia and beliefs and a bunch of, like, you might not fully understand their energy or really know where things come from in them. But yeah, so to clarify on psychosis, there's a big genetic component to it. One way to know if you have a genetic propensity is if you have any history in your family of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. You're a risk group. Then you should probably not go too hard on the psychedelics or cannabis. Even people who have no tendency for psychosis can end up in a psychosis, often related to extreme sleep deprivation and exhaustion. So if someone is sleep deprived and exhausted, they are at a higher likelihood of developing psychosis when exposed to psychedelics. Ideally, you want to surrender to the experience and not resist anything, because if you are confronted with difficult things that you don't want to face, we often try to push it away or try to be like, oh no, I'm not tripping, try to like really, try to push the feeling or the experience away. But this mental resistance just reinforces the powerlessness you have or the controllessness that you have in that moment. And so I don't want to encourage anyone to do anything. I don't want to encourage anyone to take LSD. I would say many people can benefit greatly from taking it.
How often now these days? Are you still using LSD, or how long have you been using?
There has been a period where I did it almost every single day of the week, where I did high doses on a regular basis. Now I don't really feel like that so much anymore. I think last time I did a big trip, like a proper trip, was last summer somewhere.
Okay.
So I've taken LSD many times in my life, probably over 200 times easily. I had periods where I was tripping very intensively, and then currently I don't feel like that anymore. I don't feel the need to.
You mentioned microdosing. How do you use it in your daily life?
Okay, so microdosing means that you take a very small quantity of something. In LSD, this is actually a thing that's very commonly done in Silicon Valley, in the tech industry, where the tech entrepreneurs, they're microdosing a lot because it increases your creativity and focus and your automatic behaviors, aka the habits you have, are, first of all, they don't happen as directly automatically, but also you have more awareness of your behavioral patterns. So instead of just being absorbed in what you are doing and have your little thoughts to fill up the gaps, all of a sudden it's like you took a step back and you're observing your behavior from a higher perspective. So if you are microdosing and, for example, you have a habit of smoking, instead of like normally picking up the rolling stuff and rolling a cigarette or grabbing your thing and lighting it up, all of a sudden you're doing it and you're like, oh wait, what am I actually doing? what is this thing? Why do I... This doesn't really make sense, and then put it aside. So by microdosing, for example, I quit cigarettes. Some people experience improved anxiety, but this is not even necessarily in a negative way, because this increased anxiety also just means that we are more capable of projecting ourselves onto bigger problems instead of limiting us to our narrow field of view where we are very focused on the small things in front of us. We become acutely aware of what's outside of this comfort bubble. If you're interested in trying LSD but you don't want to do anything illegal, looking into 1P LSD, 1D LSD, or looking for whatever LSD analogs are legally available, if any, in your location is a worthwhile way to explore. Do your research and understand what you are dealing with thoroughly before you take the substance, that it's in the right set and setting, because even though it can be super beneficial for most and can completely be life-changing in a positive way, it can also be life-changing in a negative way. And
with those encouraging words being said, I would like to thank you a lot for
you're very welcome.
Talking about your knowledge, your experience, and everything. I learned a lot, and I hope a lot of people watching learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the well-directed questions and for listening.
Oh, süß ihr beide, Alter. Mir ist so ein bisschen Honig ums Maul schmiert.
Danke dir, nein, danke dir.
Süß, ey.